Hello, my name is Keith Abeles, and I'm the Water and Soil Specialist at the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. And I'm here today with Mark Greenspan to discuss how we can maximize the efficient use of water and have good quality production in grapevines and other types of agricultural systems. Mark is the President of Advanced Viticulture, and I thank him for joining us today. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Keith.
Hello, great. I'm going to say a few introductory words here, and then we're going to ask questions from Mark. Um, so our goal here is how can we use water as efficiently as possible, conserve as much as possible, but optimize the quality of our grape production or other type of agricultural production. And I just want to mention that the RCD, just before we get deep into it, the RCD is here to help landowners and land managers to protect, manage, and conserve their soil and water resources. And we bridge both environmental concerns with production concerns for the best outcomes. We have a set of questions for Mark to talk about how he best manages water in vineyards and in those types of settings to optimize quality, but also deliver what is needed for the plant. And I will just say a quick start is that the first key is that you want to have your system be as efficient as possible and have optimal distribution uniformity. I've done about 80 of these evaluations in vineyards, and what we're trying to do is get it as efficient as possible so that once you have that efficiency, then you can set your scheduling, and that's where the true efficiency and the excellent production can happen, as well as doing that with the least amount of water possible. So in a sense, distribution uniformity means trying to deliver the same amount of water to every vine. So whether it is your fertigation or the actual water needs of the plants, they're all getting the same amount, and it's not across the board. And then your production is more even and your quality is more even. So with that, I want to read Mark's introduction, his bio, and I will say that Dr. Mark Greenspan is a viticulturist who founded Advanced Viticulture 15 years ago, a growing business based in Windsor, California. His company delivers multifaceted vineyard consulting with emphasis on water and nutrient management. It provides vineyard technologies and automation and is a full-service vineyard management and development company for high-end operations. Dr. Greenspan has a MS in viticulture and a PhD in agricultural engineering, both from UC Davis. So once again, thank you, Mark, for joining us. I asked Mark to come because he has a lot of experience in managing water and has developed a program that is really quite effective in using the least amount of water, but with an emphasis on quality of the grapes, which here in Sonoma County and Napa is the name of the game. It's about high quality grapes. And so he has bridged those two things. So my first question for Mark is, what is the best way to monitor plant stress and soil conditions to determine when to irrigate? What tools are used for monitoring and how do they work?
Okay, that's a big question. I'll try to keep it concise. As you know, I'm big on the soil moisture monitoring. And I think if I only had one device to use, it would be the soil moisture probes, the profile probes that we have adopted. We adopted them in 2010. Prior to that, I was using only plant stress, which I'll talk about. But I believe the soil devices have been the most beneficial to the methodology we're employing now and probably going forward in the future. It's because that we really, that's one part where we really don't know what's happening is below the ground. We can't see what's happening down there. You can look at the vines, you can kind of assess the vines visually, and at least get a rough idea of how stressed they are, but you can't tell what's going on underneath the ground. And you can't kick the dirt and tell me what's going on 4 feet down under the ground. So I really love using the probes. And what I mean by probes is these devices have multiple sensors down the depth of the soil profile. Primarily, we're using 48-inch probes, which have 6 sensors in them at 8-inch intervals. down to 48 inches. And we're monitoring them constantly or continuously. Roughly every half hour, we log a data point. And it gives us a lot of insight on where the active roots are, where the moisture is, especially in the springtime when we're trying to deplete that moisture before we irrigate. And it tells us how much is left. And it also tells us a little bit of an indication of how stressed the vines are, because we can see when the water's depleting and how rapidly it's depleting. And when that depletion slows down, then the vines are starting to go under stress. So that's our, I'd say over 50% of the information I use is from that device, those devices. I'm still a big believer in monitoring plant stress. That's a little more tedious because primarily the devices we use are still manual. The pressure chamber, the porometer are the two devices we use primarily. And those devices are indispensable as well, because I wanted to match my soil moisture up with the plant stress that I'm trying to manipulate. Because ultimately we're trying to manipulate plant stress to get the best wine quality. So it's important to do both. However, the plant stress measurements are currently manual. So we have to be out there physically making the measurements. There are some newer devices coming online. Some are better than others, and some that we're actually trying to develop ourselves to do some of this on a less tedious or less manual basis, a little more automated. And so we're evaluating some of these automated sensors as well. But ultimately, we want to measure plant stress and soil moisture. But as I mentioned at the beginning of my answer, the soil moisture is still our fundamental, our basis for a lot of our decision making. Not only to determine when to start irrigating in the spring or summer, but how often and how much to irrigate as well.
Excellent. Building on that, how can this approach and the program you offer make the most efficient use of water, conserve it, but also simultaneously confer the best possible grape quality?
Okay, good question. Good questions. I'd say I'll answer your last one first, which is the grape quality and the wine quality. So I've outlined many times my approach, which isn't probably not original, but it's somewhat, it's something that we've adopted, is the manipulation of vine water stress throughout the growing season. We try to achieve our objective is to stress the vines at a certain target level at lag phase and through veraison. And then after veraison, we can relax the stress. And before that, we want no stress on the vines while they're building the canopy during fruit set, and after fruit set, then we can start building stress. That is the trajectory we look for every growing season and it changes a little bit with variety and location and wine styles, but the general trajectory is that, and we're trying to manipulate that no matter using all these tools and our intuition and our visuals. The other part of your question is escaping me for a second. Can you repeat that really quickly?
Well, the question was, how can this approach make the most efficient use of water, conserve it, and simultaneously confer grape quality? So you got in that in your first question. You addressed quite a bit of that.
Yeah, it's really there's two things I'll answer really quickly. The best way to conserve water is also the best way to manipulate grape quality. It just happens to be perfectly simultaneous, perfectly coincidental. So in the North Coast, which we're talking about primarily, we get a lot of rainfall. Even in last year, where it was a drought year, we had 18 or so inches of rain, which is in most cases enough to wet the profile fully. And so what we're trying to do is delay that first irrigation as long as possible. And that's really one of the best ways to conserve water, is just not to irrigate until you have to. It's also by the same token, it's also the best way to build plant stress, is to let that soil moisture dry down. So we're achieving both objectives the same way. And then when we irrigate, we're using the soil moisture to determine exactly how much depletion occurs after we've irrigated. So we're not really guessing using a model. It's not a model at all. It's really just, we're actually looking at the moisture after we put it on. How long does it take for it to go away? And so we're really being precise in using exactly how much water we need to, and not too much, not too little. And to me, that's the best way to conserve water, is to just apply how much you need. But it's really, it's kind of nice, and it's really nice for wine grapes that we have a crop that doesn't need a lot of water, that we can manipulate. We can use water conservatively while achieving the same objective of wine quality. And that's really what we're all about.
Excellent. Um, what would you say are the typical or potential water use rates, or you could say a range per vine per season in
Mm.
different wine growing areas using these types of tools and the type of program you do?
Okay. It's such a huge range, and we've taken vineyards that have been irrigated and made them dry farmed, or very close to it. So it's something that dry farming is not always possible, but it is possible in this region because we get so much rainfall, and there are some soils that will hold moisture throughout almost their harvest. That said, the range that we find per vine. Let me start saying inches of water, because when I started this, people were irrigating 6 to 8 inches of water, putting on 6 to 8 inches of water on their vineyards in Sonoma County. That's more than these vines need. I'm finding about, I'd say, 1 to 3 inches, and if I had to equate that to gallons per vine, we're looking at 40 to 50 gallons per vine per year, sometimes 60, in like the Russian River area. If you go north up to Alexander Valley, it's warmer. Soils are more gravelly. They don't hold as much water. You may be looking at another 20 gallons to 30 gallons on top of that, which is going to push it around 4 to 5 inches, maybe 6 in some cases, inches of water per per season. Roughly, to equate that, you have to take inch of water is 27,000 gallons roughly, and then of acre inch, I mean, and then you divide that by the number of vines per acre. So it's all over the map, because it's all over. It's a big spectrum because we have different densities of plants. So we talk about gallons per vine. It's kind of difficult for me. I think in that way, but I also think in inches of water. So I'd say just to put a range on it, anywhere from 20 gallons per vine all the way up to 80 gallons per vine. That's a huge range. There's a lot of different objectives we have in growing, and some vineyards are growing for bulk, larger quantities, and higher, say, call production vineyards, and some are more tuned to the high end. But anyway, I've never found a vineyard that we couldn't reduce water use. Let's just say that.
There you go. Excellent. What can growers do to hold off on initiating irrigation each spring or summer? And what benefits does that provide to the grapes and water use, even once you've started irrigating for the season?
Yeah. That kind of repeats a little bit of what I've already said, but I'll try to catch it a little bit differently. Let me say that I'm a big believer in technology. Of course, that's part of our business. I like to look at numbers. I like to look at numbers, especially because it's repeatable from year to year. I can look at that soil moisture number that we started irrigating at last year and project it to next year and look for that same threshold to be reached. So I really believe that the soil moisture is a huge tool. Once we get that threshold determined, we can almost throw away our plant stress measurements, because we know we have that plant stress related to the soil moisture. But the plant stress is also indispensable. Looking at pressure bomb numbers, I like to look at stomatal conductance as well, and reaching a threshold before we start irrigating. That said, I want to say something about that, because you don't absolutely have to have these devices to determine when to irrigate. You look at shoot tips, and that's really a huge tool for us as well. We also look at the shoot tips and the shoot growth. We want the shoots to grow a certain length, usually around 4 feet, more or less, and then we want them to stop growing. And usually when they stop growing or start slowing down substantially, that's when we start turning the irrigation on. So we could do this without any instruments if we just look at that. The thing is, it's a little bit more of a guessing game, because you don't know where the moisture is in the soil. It doesn't give you any foresight into what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. If you're just looking at shoot tips, you're kind of looking at a trailing indicator when you look at shoot tips. But that said, if you have no money to spend and you just wanted to know when to start irrigating, look at your shoot tips. That's going to give you a heck of a lot of information right there. And that's really how we look at it. We look at the shoot tips, we look at the vine stress, and we look at the soil moisture. But you can use any one of those three or all three sources of information to get that information, or when a decision to determine when to start irrigating in the spring or the summer.
Excellent. And then once you've begun irrigating, are there any specific thresholds you're looking for to determine when to irrigate again?
Yeah. We're looking at, I don't want to say too many things without overgeneralizing, but we're looking at like pressure bomb numbers. Say, if we're looking at 14 bars on a Cabernet Sauvignon, we want to keep it around 14, maybe 15 at the max bars from that maximum stress period. And then we want it to go down a little bit after the veraison, occurs, maybe down to 13 to 14 bars. So we're trying to hold the vines under that stress level. We also have numbers for stomatal conductance. But I'm really looking at the soil moisture. Now, what we do with the soil moisture devices is we not only look at each individual depth, we also take a summary or an average of the profile, so that when we irrigate, we look at one single curve to determine when that spike goes up after we irrigate, or when we irrigate, how long does it take for it to come back down to that same level? That tells us when to irrigate the next time. So we're trying to do, we're not necessarily triggering our irrigations by that soil moisture level getting back down to that same moisture content, but we're trying to adjust our schedule, or maybe our intervals between irrigations, so that remains relatively constant. Or we can manipulate it to make the vines get more stressed. The soil moisture can dry down more by stretching the irrigation, letting the soil moisture decline, or pushing them closer together so the soil moisture increases over time. The soil moisture really gives us the precision that we need to put the exact amount of water on that we need. There's no ET. We don't use ET. Evapotranspiration is not part of our procedure, but the moisture content really does give us that trigger.
Excellent. So it's like three questions, but it's sort of my last main question. You started to get into this, but I'd like to hear more. Is when do vines need water the most and least in relation to growth stages? When is it best or worst to stress the vines for water? And what does that do for the quality? Mm-hmm. And how do you avoid putting too much stress on the vines?
Yeah, those are all good questions. And I kind of alluded to that. The vines need the most water when they're growing vegetatively. And so that's between bud break and certainly during fruit set, whether they're growing or not. We don't want any stress on the vines during fruit set or bloom and fruit set. That is very sensitive to stress. We don't see a lot of that in Sonoma County, but we do have some vineyards that we work with that on rocky, very thin soils that can get stressed during set. And I have seen some catastrophes arise if the vines are too stressed at that point. So we want the vines to be pretty happy from bud break all the way through full canopy, getting a full length filled out canopy vegetatively, and that includes fruit set. The most stress we have, as I mentioned already, is a lag phase through the end of veraison. And then we can apply more as we get on towards. Now, winemakers don't like to hear this, but I don't have a problem with irrigating a little extra from veraison on to harvest, because we've actually, when we manipulate the vines the way I've mentioned, and putting the maximum stress on around prior to veraison and through veraison, that's when we had the most impact on the ripening, the secondary metabolism of the fruit. And putting a little extra water on after that is really the objective at that point. I'm saying after veraison is just to keep the leaves functional, and we don't have as much of an impact on wine quality at that point, despite what everybody thinks. Not everybody, but a lot of people think that putting water on it, even close to harvest, is detrimental. I disagree with that. That's not something I want to see happen, because at that point, in the way we irrigate, we really get the soil really, really dry. And then we're just giving the vines enough water to keep it through the season. If we pull water back for even a week or two, that can really overly stress the vines and cause them to crash or cause fruit to shrivel. And how do we know? Well, again, using these tools. We measure plant stress from May through harvest, and we don't want to stop measuring that because we want to avoid the vines getting overly stressed. Now, if we see a heat wave coming, we know that's going to cause additional stress on the vine, and we'll give it a little extra irrigation, even above and beyond what we normally have been irrigating, to get it through that period of time.
Excellent. That was great. Well, this has all been very interesting, and I really thank you for your time and for explaining all these ideas and your approach. I encourage people to look at your website, which is advancedviticulture.com. Is that correct?
Advancedvit.com.
Advancedvit.com to learn more or get in touch with Mark if you're interested in learning more or seeing what opportunities there might be for you. I encourage everyone to try to integrate these tools and approaches into their growing technique because it's sort of a win-win. It is a win-win situation if you can be using less water and getting a better product in the end and a more marketable product. So thank you very much for your time, Mark. Thank you to the Department of Water Resources, DWR, for funding the CDFA and the SWEET program so that we could educate growers both on the SWEET program when it was being offered as well as doing this interview right now. And I encourage others to look at the Sonoma RCD website to learn more about our programs and find out what opportunities there are for you to participate and to protect your water and soil resources. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks, Keith.
Take care.